Okay. Then can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, I think it's working. Okay, good. The Dr. Head of the Gemara. We are on top Kuf Gimel on the base by the first two dots, which is Chalta b'minol she'enu shalai. Zok the Head of the Gemara. Toner Rabban. Na'aloi. It says the Chalta Shnaloi. The prophet says the Chalta Na'aloi me'al ragloi. His shoe. Zok the Gemara. Ainli ela Na'aloi. His shoe. Now so how do we know that it could be anyone's shoe? It doesn't have to dafka belong to the person who's doing the chalitza, the yavim. Later on, it says in the pasuk, "V'nikra shmoi b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanal." There it says plain now, doesn't say naloi, to tell you that even if it's not his shoe, it's still going to be with chalitza. So what does the pasuk mean to teach us with naloi? The Gemara naloi harayoloi. It has to be a properly fitting shoe. Which excludes if it's much too big of a shoe that he can't walk with it. Or if it's a very small shoe that doesn't cover a rib of his foot, that also wouldn't work. So na'aloi means it has to be na'aloi appropriate for him. It also is excluding the sandal mushalayim, which does not have a heel. And Rashi has two pshatim in what that means. Rashi says that ear means it was damaged, that's what has no heel. There was a city or area called Mushalayim, was a type of shoe, but it was a shoe that didn't properly cover the foot properly, so it wouldn't be good for chalitza, because it didn't have an akif. Abaye have a koi, Abaye was sitting in front of Yosef. I saw Yevamos malachlech, and the Yevamos came who needed chalitza. Omerle. So Rabbi Yosef told Abaye, "Have lei sandalach, take off your shoe and give it to the oven." So it's interesting that we just learned that it's better that it should be his own. The Mishnah says it's better that it should be his own. But the Eved, if you use somebody else, he yoitza. So Abaye wanted to check his Rebbe to see how makbid he is. So what he did was the same Mishnah, our very same Mishnah that says that lechatchila has to belong to the Yovim, also says that lechatchila has to be a right-handed shoe. So what did Abaye do? Yoev le sandal the Samoila. He took off his left shoe and gave it to the Yovim to put on the Yovim's right foot. So Omer le Eimer d'Omer Rabbanan di'evet. So Rabbi Yosef told Abaye, why are you giving him the left shoe? Your left shoe is good with the Evet. But lechatchila you shouldn't use the left shoe. Omer le, so Abaye told back to Rabbi Yosef, well, what about you? You want me to give him my shoe, and he won't use his own shoe. Yachi sandal shein shaloi nami. Eimer d'Omer Rabbanan di'evet lechatchila mi'omer. The fact that you're asking me to give him my shoe is also a b'di'evet. Omer le, Rabbi Yosef told Abaye, hachika min alach. You don't understand what I'm telling you. What I meant to tell you is havle v'aknile. Be magnet to him. Give him a matano nachlahafser. So it's taka is. It's taka lechatchila. But giving him a left-handed shoe, that would be b'di'evet. Sandal shalates. The Mishnah says that even a wooden sandal would be good, would work. We had this machlokes yesterday. If a wooden sandal works or not. The Gemara Mantana on Shmuel Reb Meir, he's going according to Reb Meir, that nan hakita yoytze b'kaf shaloi. Divrei Reb Meir. Reb Meir holds that an amputee can go out on Shabbos with his prosthesis, which shows that it has a din of a shoe, and therefore it's not considered carrying. But Rabbi Yosy Yoser, so according to Rabbi Yosy, that a prosthesis is not considered his shoe, you wouldn't be able to use it for chalitza. Avud Shmuel Omer, b'mechupar v'divrei kol. It could even be going according to Rabbi Yosy, but it's speaking where it's mechupar when the prosthesis is covered with leather. There for sure it would work for chalitza. Omer Papi Mishmei Derabah. Sandal hamuskar. We know there's a halacha that when something gets a nega, it's not automatically immediately condemned. Most negoyim are not immediately condemned. There's a observation period. So what if you had a shoe that you wanted to use for chalitza, but it had a nega and it was in the observation period? So the law is loy sach loitzpo. You shouldn't use it for chalitza, but if you did use it for chalitza ksheira, but the chalitza would be good. But sandal hamuchlat, if it was a sandal that was already condemned, that it was a real nega, loy sach loitzpo, that you cannot use for chalitza at all, and that v'imcholta chalitza psula. That the chalitza would be puzzle. Let's see if Rashi says why. So Rashi says chalitza psula. So Rashi illustrates, we know that once something has a nega muchlat, it's got to be burnt. If it's got to be burnt, then I don't have a shear. We said that the shoe that you use for chalitza has to have a minimum size. It has to cover up roiv the foot. But if it's going to be burnt, we say it's as if it's not in existence, and therefore it would not work. That is the shita of Rav Papi. However, Rav Papa argues, Zogt Gemara weiter. Rav Papa argues, Amar Papa Mishmei Rava, Echad Sandal HaMuskar v'Echad Sandal HaMuchlut lo yistach l'tzboi. Even if it's condemned and it's going to be burnt, you still should not use it for chalitzos, even a muskar. I'm sorry, I'm making a mistake. L'chatchila, you shouldn't use either one, but the Dr. of Papa, Rabba says that even if it's a sandal HaMuchlut, which is going to be burnt, it's still going to be kosher. We're going to need to know why. If it's because it's on l'sreifa, why would it be kosher? The Gemara is going to explain. Meisvei freik the Gemara. Meisvei freik the Gemara. We are on the top of Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, and we just discussed a machlokes between Rav Papi and Rav Papa. Rav Papi said that a shoe that you want to use for chalitza that has a negla, that's muchlat, which means you're going to be burning this shoe, that may not be used for chalitza. But Rav Papa says, in the name of Rava, that b'di'evid, even if the shoe is going to be burnt, you're still allowed to use it for chalitza. The reason why you wouldn't be able to use it for chalitza is obvious, because it's a michtes shiurei. If it's burnt, if it's also to be burnt, we consider it like it's burnt, and then you don't have the shear of a shoe that covers your foot. The question is, why would it be a good chalitza? And that's what the Gemara is going to explain. So first the Gemara asks a kasha, meisvei, bayis hamuskar, if you have a house that has a nega in it, and it's under observation, mitamei mitoichloi, it will be from inside. And
Mr. Zalman?
There are those, yes.
Mr. Zalman?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Just because, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just because the shoe is oimid to be burnt, why do we consider it burnt? I mean, a person is also oimid to die. Why would we consider him dead? We don't consider him dead if the shoe is still around.
There's a rule all over Shas that whenever something needs a shear, if something needs a shear and it's also to be destroyed, we consider that there's not enough of a shear. That's why the lulav, for instance, of an ir nidachas, even if it's in your hand, you won't be yotzei the mitzvah, not because it's not there. So the human is there. But if you need a shear, a lulav, you need to have at least 3 tefachim. If you need a shear and it's also l'sreifa, then we say you're not maintaining the minimum shear. So this concept that if it's also l'sreifa, if it's going to be burnt, it's like it's not there, that's not really accurate. What I should have said was that if it's also to be burnt, you don't have a shear of whatever shear you need.
Okay.
So let's see the Gemara weiter. You have a house that's tamei. So the Gemara is metamim b'soichai. If it's muskar, it's metamim b'soichai. Meaning, if you're on the inside, it's metamim. But if it's already a house that's going to be destroyed because it has a condemned nega, mitoichai u'meyachayv. It's even metamim from the outside. But it doesn't make a difference if it's a house that's muskar or muchlat. If there's a special pasuk of abol abayis, if you come into the house, if you walk into the house, you become tamei. So everybody agrees, no matter what level of tumah it has, whether it's only muskar or if it's muchlat, walking into the house will make you tamei. A keli that walks into the house will become tamei. if you're going to say that there's no shear when something's also to be burnt or destroyed, in order to be tame, because of coming into the house, you needed there should be a house, a shear of a house. Since this house is destined to be destroyed, there is no shear of a house. It's not the right size house that we would be able to be tame. Zog to Gemara, shiny hasam, by the house, there's a difference. The Omer Krava Nosatz es abayis. The Torah refers to the house as a bayis even after it's destroyed. Afilu b'shas netitza karu bayis. So not after, even while you're destroying it, it still has the status of a house. Lagabe hilchos negoyim, because the Torah says so beferish, and therefore even a house that's condemned to be destroyed, lagabe da'alocha of aval abayis is tamei, it's considered a bias because the Torah specifically made that allowance. Tashma. What about a matlis sheyesh by shalosh al shalosh? We're talking about the nega that's in a beged. The minimum size beged, the minimum requirement of a sheer beged that's required for it to be a beged is 3 by 3, 3 fingers by 3 fingers, and if it's not that sheer, it's not tamei b'nega. So, even if it's a very thin beged, so it might be 3 by 3, but it's very thin fabric, so it doesn't have a sheer kazayis. And we'll see soon the relevance of a sheer kazayis. It's kivan shenichnas ruba labayis tahar. If it's a beged that has a nega on it, if roiv of it entered into a house that was tahar, tamaso, it made the house tamei. So zok to Gemara, my lav muchletas. When it says imatlis, sheyesh b'sholosh or sholosh is metama, let's say it means that it had a nega and it's already condemned, and that means we're going to be burning this beged. So if that's the case, you should say that it's missing the shear. You should say that you don't have enough of a beged going into the house to be metama the house if it's also to be burnt. So maybe in fact we're not speaking about muchletes that's also to be burnt. We're speaking about a shmata that's only going to be locked up for observation. It's not yet destined to be burnt, and that's why if Roy went into the house, it's going to be Torah. If that's the case, let's look at the Sefer. And from the Sefer, we're going to see that we must be speaking about a beged that has a nega that's already condemned, it's muchlat, and it's going to be destroyed. Why? Because this same beged that was 3 by 3, but it was made out of a very thick fabric, and therefore its volume is multiple kazayim. Then we say, even if only a kazayis of it went in, so it's not even 3 by 3, not even a roiv of a 3 by 3. Just the volume of a kazayis inside a bayis tar, it'll be matam of the house. Now, the interesting thing is there is no such tuma by a nega of a kazayis. You find that if a beged of 3 by 3 or roiv to beged goes into the house, that'll be matam of the house. If you touch it, it'll become tamei. But where do you ever see a shir kazayis? Dr. Gemara, the only place where we can have a hamamina of a shir kazayis is because we learned it out of mace. And once again, the Lublina strikes again, because this is going to be relevant to what we learned yesterday with Miriam, who became a mitzaras. So let's see what it says. If the fabric that we're discussing in our brayse is a fabric that's also to be burnt, then only then would you say that it'll be metama with the kazayis, just like a kazayis when a mace is metama. What's the shaykhs? So here's the beautiful Rashi where the Lublina strikes again. So I'm looking at Rashi just to the left. Only a nega muchlat in a beged would create tuma if it's only kazayis. Even though you don't have the standard tuma of negoyim, which is by a beged shalosh al shalosh. Why should a kazayis be tuma? The teretz is it has nothing to do with nega. It's because from the muchlat ishkish lemeis. There's a hekish between a nega muchlat and a mace. Umeis metama bekazayis, and a mace is metama bekazayis. Frekt Rashi, behecha ishkish. Where do you see that a nega is considered a mace? The ksiv in our pasture, Allah sehi kameis. Shemiriam muskeresavli. Miriam had a nega, but she wasn't yet muchlat. She was only a musker. She was still under observation. Because Aaron told Moshe, Al no sechlat. Don't allow it to become a nega that's cholet, that she's mamish mitzayra, shaloi seik a mace. So she shouldn't be like a mace. Don't let your sister become like a mace. Poilosh that she should pass the observation period, and after 7 days she should become Torah, which is indeed what happened. But you see over here a hekish from mace to Negoyim, that Negoyim will also be metama with a mere kazayas. Zog to Gemara. Ella shiny hasam the Amar Kra v'sarif efsabeket. Really, we're not speaking by Mulchut. Really, we're speaking by Muskar. Really, we're speaking by Mulchut. You're going to ask if it's Mulchut that should be Mechter's Kat Shirei. So no, we have the same similar pasuk by Nega. Shiny hasam the Amar Kra v'sarif efsabeket. Afilu b'shas reifa kori beged. Just like we said, a house that's going to be destroyed, we say even b'shas netitza, it's considered to be a house. L'gabe tumas nega. So too a beged, it's also to be burnt. It's going to retain its tuma l'gabe tumas nega because of the exercise. So frek gemara v'ligmar minei. So why don't you say the same thing when it comes to chalitza? That if you're doing chalitza on we're using a shoe that's muchlat, you should also say just like by nega. Even though it's also to be destroyed, l'gabe tuma. This isn't nega. Just like l'gabe tuma, we say it retains its tuma. Why don't we also say that it retains its status of a shoe and it works for the chalitza? Just because we know that a beged that's also to be destroyed still is considered a beged. L'gabe being metama, lav dafke is it considered a beged le'inyan to be a shoe for chalitza. Amar Rabba hilchasa. Echad sandal hamuskar, the echad sandal hamuchlot, the echad hamuchlot, the echad sandal shalaboid kachavim, or even if it was a sandal of a avodah zarah that was used on a getchke, loy sachloit, you shouldn't use it lechatchila. B'imcholta chalitzas ksheira. But if you did chalitza, the chalitza is kosher. So we already know what sandal muskar is and sandal muchlat is, and we said chalitzas ksheira because b'di'eved, he's going to learn. Like Rav Papi, who holds that we have to look at Papi that we would learn Isser from Tuma, and just like by Tuma, we say the beged retains its status of a beged, even though it's also to be destroyed. It'll also retain its status of a shoe to be good for chalitza, even though it's going to be destroyed. Now, what's the case of avodah zarah? So Rashi said the case of avodah zarah is it was given over to avodah zarah to be a meshamish of avodah zarah. Now the eitzah it would be if it belongs to a yid, it's also the sreifa. You can't do anything with it, and it wouldn't be good for chalitza. But Rashi says this is speaking where it belonged to a goy, and we know a goy who has avodah zarah could be mevatlet and make it ois avodah zarah. So therefore, it's not also the sreifa. It's still also b'anoah. How can you use something that's also enough for chalitza? And that Rashi says, mitzvahs lav lehenis nitnu. When you're doing the mitzvah of chalitza, that's not called having a noah, and therefore, even though this is currently asur b'anoah, it's still able to be used for chalitza, and there's no problem of mechta shiurei because the goy could still be mavat. What about if it was shal takruvas avodah? What if it was something that you actually presented to the avodah zarah as a gift? Like a carbon, that's already also forever, and Rashi says that's ishkes l'meis. Therefore, the kanto the chalitza michla shirei. That is assured to also to be destroyed, and therefore the chalitza wouldn't be good. So let's turn over onto Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, which is in fact today's daf. Taking a little bit of time to load over here. Wait a Baruch Hashem, just load it up. Or if it was a shoe of an irni dachas, or if it's v'shel zokin, if it's made and it's dedicated for tachrichim, there loisachot, that's also b'anoah, and it's also to be buried. It's like also the sreifa, and therefore it will not be good for a chalitza. And those items, since it is michtas karta shiurei, we say that the chalitza is possible even with the Evid. But Rashi says that by zakenas lechvoida, it's not because it's michtas karta shiurei. My apologies. It's because lav nalu, something that's made for a dead man, that's not called a shoe. So Amalei Ravina Rashi, Maishna zaken ha'asal lechvoida, the lav lilucha of it. Why is it that if it's the shoe of a zaken that's designed to be for tachrichem, since it's not made to walk in, it's not considered a shoe, and therefore it's not good for chalitza, the beidin and ami lav lilucha of it. The special chalitza shoe that Batei Dinim have, no one's walking in that. Those are just being used for chalitza. So that shouldn't either be considered a good shoe to make chalitza. Amar lei, that's not true. Ilu maske be'shlucha de beidina mi kapar l'daina. If a shlich bezin wanted to use the shoe and walk with it a little bit, would there be akvada? Of course not. Bezin has no problem with it. So therefore, it is considered a shoe, and therefore it's good for chalitza. It's funny that the mere fact that it's a chalitza shoe made by bezin for chalitza is a disqualification, unless it would be something that people would walk in. Imagine if a bezin had a chalitza shoe and someone in the bezin tried it on to walk around with it, and they scream, no, it's an expensive chalitza, don't walk around with it. That would actually disqualify from chalitza. Only because it could be used to walk in would it be qualified for chalitza. Mashiach, the shoe that was created just to be used for a mace, like tachrichem, never to walk in, that would not be kosher to make chalitza with. Look at the Mishnah. Chalta balayla chalitzos ksheira. So now we're on today's daf. If someone made chalitza by night, the chalitza is a kosher chalitza. Rabbi Lezer Poshel, Rabbi Lezer holds it's not a good chalitza. Next case, b'shmoil. What if the chalitza was done on the left foot? Chalitzos psula. Chalitzos psula. The chalitza is possible. Rabbi Lezer machshir. Rabbi Lezer holds even if it's on the left foot, it's going to be kosher. Let's say the machlokes of whether or not you can make chalitza at night is the following machlokes. The Marsavar Makshinin Rivim L'Negoyim. By nega, we know you're not allowed to look at a nega by night. A nega you can only look at by day. And the pasuk says Chol Riv Chol Nega. Al PM here Chol Riv Chol Nega. There's actually a hekesh from nega to Dini Torah. And just like by Dini Torah, you cannot look at them by night. And Rashi says because it says Uveyoim Herois Boy. So we learned that you're only allowed to look at Negoyim by day. So too, Dinei Torah you can only do by day. And Chalitza is considered Dinei Torah. You know why? Because once Chalitza is done, then she collects the ksuba. So therefore, Chalitza is also considered Dinei Torah. So Zok Gemara, the Ma'ashav Makshin Ribim and Negoyim. And therefore, just like a nega, you can only pass it on by day. So too, Chalitza. And the Tanakama who holds Chalitza Ksheira holds there is no hekesh for Ribim to Negoyim. So Lloyd, Lav Dafk is Apshat. You can say the Chulam Aloy Makshinin Rivim Legoyim. Nobody compares Riv to Nega. And in fact, you would be able to do a Din Torah by night. But even if you don't learn Rivim from Negoyim, you still cannot start a Din Torah. There's an independent limud by Dinei Torah that you're not allowed to start a Din Torah by day. Although if you started by day, you're allowed to conclude it in Torah by night. Had we learned it from Nega, we would have known that you can't even conclude it in Torah by night. But by Riv alone, we know you can start by day, you just can't, you can conclude by day, you can start by day and you can conclude by night. You could not start it in Torah by night, but you could start it in Torah by day. Dr. Gemara, if you would make the hekesh, afilu Gemara didn't belayla namiloy. If we would make the hekesh to Nega, then it would be also even to finish up a din Torah by day. But we hold you are allowed to finish. I'm sorry, if you would learn it from the Goyim, you wouldn't be able to finish a din Torah by night. But we learn that although you cannot start a din Torah by night, you're allowed to finish it by night. And the machlokes here is what do you consider a chalitza? Ma'ashav chalitza ketchilas din dami. One of them holds that a chalitza is like starting a din Torah, and you're not allowed to start a din Torah by night, and that's why your religion passes. The Kama holds chalitza k'gemar din dami. Chalitza is like a gemar din, and just like a gemar din you could do at night, so too a chalitza you could do at night. Rabba bar Chia katosva avad uvde b'moik uvichidi uvalayla. Rabba bar Chia did a chalitza relying on three major kulas. A was b'moik, which means it was a non-leather shoe, which we had a big machlokes about between the Meir and the Tanakama if that's allowed. Ubi Yechidi, he did a chalitza by himself without three dayanim. And Ubalayla, he did it at night, which our Mishnah here is not so fond of. So Shmuel wanted to protest that he would do such a thing. So Amar Shmuel told him, Kamarav Guvre, you think you're so chashuv that you could pass like a yachid? You're so confident in your psak that you could pass like a yachid? Rashi says it was a lashon of a zoyin. It was a lashon of an attack. To use Rashi's words exactly, Rashi says the lashon guy. He said it in a mocking way. Oh, you think you're such a great guy? It's my kasha. What was Shmuel's problem? What exactly did Rabbi Barchia do wrong? Imuk, if the ta'avla is that he used a shoe that was made out of fabric, Stamatanya, we have a brisa, we looked at brisa, a stam brisa, that in fact says that you could do chalitza with a cloth shoe. He's following the stam mishnah. Can't have a tanya for that. Elila, if your tanya is because he did chalitza at night against Stamatanya. Look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says stam, so you can't have a tanya on him for doing that. The problem that Shmuel really had with Rabbi Barchia is that he took it upon himself to do chalitza without a bezdin. How could you have done it by yourself? The yichidah katanila, because the yichidah, the only person who says that you're allowed to make chalitza without a bezdin is a yachid, and there is no stama. There is no stam mishnah or stam brisa to say that you could make chalitza with a yachid. You can do chalitza with a yachid, you don't need a bezdin. It's done. We learned, and this is going to be the next mishnah that we're about to learn. What if he had 2 or 3, so he even had a bezdin? So everything seemed to be wonderful. But then then we found out that one of the young was either a korav or a apostle. So kum you didn't have 3 people, but a chalitza. Chalitza psula. The stam of the Mishnah holds that the chalitza is apostle. The opposite of what Rabbi Barchia feared. Sure, you have a Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan Sandler, Machshir, they're Machshir. There's even a story where someone did chalitza. They were in jail. They didn't have access to bezdin, and the Yovim did chalitza on the sister-in-law to be matter her. And the Shaila came to Rabbi Kiva, the Hiksher, and he was Machshir. But again, Rabbi Kiva is also only a Yochid. We don't pass like Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan Sandler who are Machshir. We pass that it's not a good chalitza. So that was Shmuel's taina on Rabbi Barchia. How would you do a chalitza just by yourself without a bezdin when you see the consensus is that that's not allowed? Or maybe there's a different reason why Shmuel was upset with Rabbah, because kulu nama yichidah katanilu. All of these halachas, sure, we found a stam for them, but I'm going to show you that the mikor for all of these stams is viter only a yochid who relied on the kula of using a cloth shoe and who relied on the kula of doing it by night. Where do you see this? The Tanya Amar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosy, Anira Isis Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. I saw Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, who's a Kohen Gadol, shecholat b'moik b'yichidi u'v'layla. I saw only the Yochid Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha do this. He used the moik, which is what Rabbi did. B'yichidi what Rabbi did in B'layla. So all Yechidim, and therefore it was inappropriate for him to do that, and that's why Shmuel made a snide remark about it. Tosfos points out something very interesting. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was one of the Yevamos. He's the one who got time and heard that it was Nigzar Milamayla. The problem is Rabbi Shmuel ben Yosy. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was killed as one of the Asar Gemachos before Rabbi Kiva, right? After Rabbi Kiva died, then Rebbe took over, being the Rosh Hashiva, and Rabbi Shmuel ben Yosy was a Talmud of Rebbe. So how could Rabbi Shmuel ben Yosy, who was a Talmud of Rebbe, meaning he was too young for Rabbi Kiva, how could he have seen Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, who was even before Rabbi Kiva? How is that possible? That's Tosfos' ha'ara. So Tosfos says it's not shver. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha could have been very old, and he could have lived even in the times of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, but he happened to have been a Talmud of Rebbe's. That's not necessarily a problem. But Tosfos says there's a sheet that holds that there were actually 2 Rabbi Shmuel ben Yosy's. There was one who was a Talmud of Rebbe, but there was another one who did in fact live in the time of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Zok more weiter. Bismoil chalitzasa, if it's kosher or not, we had that Rebbe Eliezer holds that it's kosher, and the Tanakama holds that it's possible. Zok to Gemara, my time in the Rabbanon. What is this for the Rabbanon that the chalitza is possible if you use the left foot, not the right foot? By mitzvah, it says regel. You put the dam on boyin ragla hayamonis. Let's see the pasuk inside. So by ragla, it's very explicit hayamonis. It's clear by the foot of a mitzvah. It's the right foot. So we learn regel from mitzvah. It says v'chalatz nalim al ragloi. It says regel by chalitza. It says regel by the taras hamitzvah. Malalon diyamin. Just like by taras hamitzvah, the right foot. Afkan diyamin. So too by chalitza, it's the right foot. For Rebbe Eliezer lo yalaf regel mitzvah, and Rebbe Eliezer does not learn regel mitzvah because Rebbe Eliezer said that it was mutter. It's kosher with the evid if you use the left foot. How can you say that? We have a brayso that shows that Rebbe Eliezer is darshaning the regel of mitzvah, because it says as follows: How do you know that when the evid wants to stay on past the time, the 6 years, he wants to stay until Yovel? How do you know that the ritzia has to be in his right ear? They drill a hole in his ear. Nemer kan oizen. It says oizen by ritzia. But never oizen, it says oizen by the taras hamitzvah. Mal alon yumin, just like the taras hamitzvah. I'm sorry, just like by taras hamitzvah, we know that the dam is put on his right ear. Afkan yumin, so too by ritzia, the ritzia has to be done on the right ear. So you see clearly that Rebbe Eliezer is darshaning the Gzera Shava. He is learning from the halachas of Mitzvah to all over the Torah that it means the right. Maybe you could say that we either in our Mishnah we switch around. It's actually a shayla in the Rishonim. If you switch around our Mishnah and maybe Rebbe Eliezer holds it's also to use the right foot, and it won't be a good chalitza with the right foot. Or maybe this halacha is not Rebbe Eliezer. Rava my lalim to not a kasha. Oizen mufti. When you're reading from oizen of mitzvah. Now the Gemara tells us that oizen, all of the words when we say oizen, regel, yeah, those are all extra words. But we know that a Gzera Shava, in order to be able to sustain a kasha on it, the Gzera Shava has to be mufna ishnei tzaddim. So the tzad of mitzvah, there all of those words are extra. The shaila is on the other side, is it extra? So Zok the Gemara, oizen mufni. The word oizen by the Eved HaNitza, there also the word oizen is extra. So it's a Gzera Shava mufni mishnei tzad, but regel mufni. The problem is, although regel might be extra by the parsha of mitzvah, regel is not extra by the parsha of chalitza. And therefore, you might not be able to learn the Gzera Shava if you have a pircha on it. Even if it's not mufna, but you could dash from the Gzera Shava that's not mufna if there's no pircha. So what is the pircha? Why wouldn't you be able to learn from mitzvah that just like mitzvah is the right foot, so too chalitza should be the right foot? So tomorrow, because equal mefrich, mal mitzvah shegenton eitz erez ve'ezav v'shnisalas. Mitzvah, which is so many halachas and so many chumras, there's a hakpada dafka on the right foot. But chalitza, maybe there wouldn't be hakpada to be on the right foot. And therefore, even though Rebbe Eliezer could learn Gzera Shava by Ritzia, where it's a Gzera Shava mufna, he wouldn't necessarily learn that Gzera Shava to chalitza, where it's not mufna. Rashi says a very important thing, that here we just said that Rebbe Eliezer holds that if it's not mufna mishnei tzaddim, you would ask a pircha on the Gzera Shava. So Rashi says, this is the makar in all of Shas. All of Shas, we know, the more brings up many times that according to Rebbe Eliezer, even if it's mufna mitzad echad, you would learn the Gzera Shava, but you would slug it up. You would slug it up if you could. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. What happens if it's chaltza v'rokaka? She did chalitza, there's three components that we always talk about in chalitza. There's the chalitza of taking off the shoe, there's the spitting, and there's the third thing is the kriya. We learned she has to say certain things. Yevamos she has to say that my Yevamos doesn't want to do Yevamos. So the Mishnah is discussing the three components, which ones are ma'akev, which ones aren't. So the Mishnah starts with chalpa. She took off her shoe, veraka, and she did the spitting, avaloi kara, but she didn't say the psukim that she's supposed to say. Chalitza sheker. That's a chalitza. So we've determined that the kriya is definitely not ma'akev. Let's try a different combination. Kara, she said the kriya, veraka, and she spit avaloi chalza. So clearly taking off the shoe is ma'akev. How about chalza b'kara? She did chalitza, and she said parasha, she didn't spit. There we have a machloikis, so it's a machloikis if the spitting is ma'akev chalitza. Rabbi Elazar mechalitzas psula, and Rabbi Kiva mechalitzas ksheir. So Rabbi Elazar clearly holds that the spitting is ma'akev, and Rabbi Kiva holds the spitting is not ma'akev. And the Mishnah continues on with the conversation between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Kiva to tell us what the svaros of each one are. So I'm just going to turn over the Omid. Hopefully it will work, and then we will continue weiter. Amar Lei, Rabbi Elazar told Rabbi Kiva, how could you say that you don't need the Rakika, the spitting is not ma'akev? It says kacha yeyasa. It says that the woman says kacha yeyasa. This happens to the person as shalaybana as beis achav. So kacha yeyasa teaches us that all the ma'asim have to be done. Kol davar shu ma'asim ma'akev. Anything that's an action is ma'akev. So dibor, the kriya the male is not ma'akev, but the spitting the ma'asim, the taking off the shoes of ma'asim, they should be ma'akev. So how could you, Rabbi Kiva, say that it's not ma'akev? Amalei Rabbi Kiva, Misham Raya. From your own pasuk of Kacha Yasa, I have a right to my shita. Kacha Yasa le'ish. It doesn't say Kacha Yasa, it says Kacha Yasa le'ish. And we learn from there, called Davar Shu Ma'isa be'ish. What's ma'akev? Something that's a ma'isa on the person. Meaning, the shoe, when she takes it off, she's doing something on the man. When she's spitting, it has nothing to do with him. She's just spitting. And it has nothing to do with him. And therefore, that would not be ma'akev. So the machloikis, again, whether or not Rikiko's ma'akev is if you say Kacha Yasa, every ma'isa is ma'akev, or only Kacha Yasa leish, only ma'asim that are on the Yovim are ma'akev. Zok the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Hacheresh, someone who's a deaf mute, shenechlatz, who did chalitza, v'charesh shechalza, or if a woman is deaf mute, v'chayletzes lekatan, or chalitza lekatan, I mean the man is a cotton, chalitza psula. That will be possible. Ketana shechalza. What if chalitza was done to a ketana? Now you would think, what if the chalitza was done to a ketana? So the woman was a ketana. So the halacha is tachloit misha tigdil. She needs to do chalitza again when she's an adult. So from here it's mashma that if a ketana chalitza, even though it's not a good chalitza to free her l'shuk of a zoyvait, she can no longer do yibum. But nevertheless, for her to be free to marry, she still would need a proper chalitza. What happens if it's chalta b'shnayim or b'shloisha? We just learned this Mishnah number Aleph. Chalta b'shnayim or b'shloisha. V'nimtza echad men karav et pasel. So come to chalitza, you didn't have a best enough free. Chalitza psula. Tanakama holds that the chalitza is pasel. However, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan and Sander are machshir and they're machshir. There was once someone in jail, and there was no one around. So the Yevamos just did chalitza the Yevamos just between those two. And he was machshir. And like we look at them a base, ein halacha k'oisei we pass on halacha l'maisa that it wouldn't be a good chalitza. Zok to Gemara, Amar Rav. Rav said, Hashta. Hashta. Now before I say that so confidently, let me look back to the Gemara. The Gemara at the end said, the Gemara ended up believing that it wouldn't be good. Although there are those who hold it's good, the Gemara holds it wouldn't be good. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Rabba said, Hashtag Amar Kriya Ma'akev. Now that you're saying that Kriya is not Ma'akev, right? We said the first that if she did not say the psukim that she has to say, it'll still be good chalitza. If someone is a mute his chalitza would be good because you don't need to say anything. If you don't need to say anything, so then there shouldn't be a problem with a mute or a woman who's mute doing chalitza. Tanan we learned cheresh and nechlatz v'cheresh shechaltza v'chalatzas minakatan chalitzas psula. That's our Mishnah. A cheresh is possible. My time. Why would the cheresh be possible? Lav mishum de lav b'nei kriya ninu. Wouldn't it be the reason because they can't read, they can't speak? So if that's the case, how could you rather say that the chalitza of an ilam is kosher? The cheresh and the chereshes problems because they can't read. Zokmar loy. That's not the problem with the cheresh and the chereshes. Not being able to speak is not a problem. It's the lav b'nei deyanim. It's because they don't have das. They don't have das. So once again, why are you rather saying that an ilam is allowed to do chalitza and the chalitza works just because someone who can speak doesn't have to say the kriya and it'll still be a good chalitza? How could you stretch it to say that an ilam, somebody who cannot speak, their chalitza is kosher? They're not considered a bardas. Amar Rava, what are you talking about? An ilam would be considered a bardas. Ilam ve'ilmus b'nei deyanim. A deaf mute, we say has no das, and therefore their chalitza is possible. But merely someone who can't speak, they are b'nei deyanim. Ufumayu hu dechayvlu. Unfortunately, they have a problem with their mouth. Their mouth cannot speak. But avada they're bardas. So therefore, Zot Rava and Ilam should be able to do chalitza. In fact, the Gemara Ba'amri Devei Rabbi Yanai. The Rabbi Yanai said the reason why in our Mishnah Cherish and the Chereshes cannot be involved in the chalitza, and the chalitza is possible. You know why? Because the very Yanai learned very it says V'amar Aisha, it says V'amar Aisha, it says V'amar. Rashi quotes the pasuk. It says V'amar by the man, V'ansa V'amar says by the lady, and it's felt in an amira. So if that's the problem with a cheresh, well then that problem should apply equally to an elaim. So how could Rava say that an elaim's chalitza is kosher? If it's felt in Amar and Amra, the chalitza of an elaim cannot be kosher. So we have to change pshat. In fact, Rava is addressing the seifa, and he's saying that an elaim, in fact, cannot do chalitza, and you cannot do chalitza in the elamis. Cheresh shenechlatz v'cheresh shechaltza v'chalitz v'nakad v'chalitz psula. Rava hashta the amrit kriya ma'akva. Now that we're saying kriya is ma'akiv, because that's why the cheresh and the chereshes, that's why they're chalitz is psula. Lefichach ilam ve'ilma shechaltzu chalitz psula. Who are then an ilam and ilmus to make chalitza? The chalitza is possible because they can't speak. You're going to ask me if they have to be able to speak. So why is it that you don't have to do the kriya? Because the Mishnah does say that for people who could speak, even if they didn't do the kriya, the chalitza will be good. Why? You need the amar, you need the amra. We're relying on the famous rule of Reb Zera, who holds kol roy lebila and bila makeves boy, v'chol she'ein roy lebila bila makeves. The halacha is by a mincha. By a mincha, you mix the flour with the oil, and that's how you prepare the mincha. However, if you didn't mix the flour with the oil, you just put it into the bowl, that would be good enough, and the mincha would be kosher. But what if you had 61, up to 60 saw, you could mix together in a bowl, and therefore, even though you didn't mix it in the bowl, we consider it as if it was mixed. But if you have esrainim, but if you have 61 esrainim in one bowl, if you gave such a big mincha that there's 61 esrainim, there it would not be kosher. You'd have to split it up into two bowls. You mix properly in one bowl, and therefore Abzera says you don't need bila, but you need at least that you could do bila if you'd like to. So if it's 61 saw, it's not royal bila. Their bila is makeves. But if it's royal bila, it's less than 61 esrainim, 60 or less, then even if you don't mix it, the mincha is kosher. So too over here, people who are able to speak, they're kosher to do chalitza, even though the actual amira is not makev. But if they're elated, they can't speak at all, that's ain't royal bila. They can't even speak if they want to. Therefore, the dibur will be ma'akev for them, and therefore an elam may not do chalitza. The chalitza of an elam or an elamis is not a good chalitza, even though someone who could speak, the chalitza would be good, even though they didn't do the amiris. They sent They sent a shaila to Avudah Shmuel as follows: Yevamos sherakla tachlis. Yevama, who didn't do the whole parsha of chalitza, all she did was in front of Bezin she spat. So they said that tachlis should do chalitza, meaning that should be enough to disqualify her from Yibum. Of course, it wouldn't free her without doing the proper chalitza and pulling off a shoe, but if a zoivite, it's enough of a process that she's no longer able to do Yibum. Michlal de ifsala la me'achim. She's not possible to marry to do Yibum with any of the men. Mani, who would hold such a thing, that merely spitting is enough of a chalitza that it disqualifies her from now doing Yibum? Ilemi Rabbi Kiva, if you want to say it's going according to Rabbi Kiva, and who is Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Kiva in our Mishnah was the one who said, Rabbi Kiva was the one who said in our Mishnah that spitting is not active, right? Rabbi Kiva called over shu ma'isa be'ish. Only time that's a ma'isa on the ish is ma'akiv, like taking off a shoe, but spitting is not ma'akiv. So if we're going according to Rabbi Kiva, who else spitting is not ma'akiv, then it doesn't make sense at all. Hashta. Umava makamitzvah. Madach, when you were actually doing a real chalitza, where you might want to argue that you need the rikika, you need the spitting to be as a part of the chalitza. The ikal meimar, midi the have a murin. The halacha is, if you have a murin, you're not allowed to eat the chelik of the carbon that's eaten by the people before you're makav de murin. But if there are no murin, for instance, they got lost or they became tamei, then you don't need that kravas murin. So look at a murin. The chilesnu, if they're not around, le makvi, then they're makav dachila. But the isnu, but when they are, they're makvi. And still, by rikika, where you could spit, and we're doing a proper chalitza, so you would think that that's a time where the rikika would be required, because everything is in place and you're doing a real chalitza. And still, Amar Rabbi Kiva le makva. Rabbi Kiva still said that the rikika, spitting is not ma'akiv, and the chalitza will be good. Me'achin yivsalah. So if you're spitting without any process, and you're not in the middle of a chalitza, would Rabbi Kiva hold that over there, that the spitting would have enough of an importance that it would answer her to the Yevamos? It makes no sense. So this psak that we said, that if a woman just spat in Bezdin, that would be enough to passel her from doing Yibum, it would not make sense to say that that's Rabbi Kiva's position. Velo Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar, who holds that spitting is an integral part of the chalitza, because he held if you didn't spit, the chalitza would be possible. According to him, might want to argue that if a woman just spat in Bezdin, that would be enough to passel her from doing Yibum. Zaktimur, that's not a mistaber either, because what Shnei Dvar Hamatir Rabbi Lazar gives the spitting chashivas as one of the integral components of a chalitza. What are the two integral components? There's the actual taking off the shoe, and there's the spitting. And these two things together combine to be Shnei Dvar Hamatir, to make the heter of chalitza. But Rabbi Lazar holds, but we all hold, Ushnei Dvar Hamatir, Ein Mailan Zeh. Since Rabbi Lazar holds that rikika and chalitza are the two components to the Shnei Dvar Hamatir, and the halacha is, whenever you have two Dvar Hamatir, one does not work without the other one. So once again, how could you explain why, if she made a rikika bebezin without any chalitza process, why would that answer her from her Yevamos? Why does that disqualify her from doing Yibum? Elika Rebbe. According to Rebbe, we could find a reason why, if she only made rikika, that would be enough not to be matter her, but at least it would be enough to ask her from doing Yibum. The time we learned, Kivshay Atzeres. On Shavuos, they would bring two shlomims that were two sheep, and along with them were brought the Shtei Alechem. And the halach is, the Shtei Alechem only becomes Kedushas Aguf when you shecht the karbonis, the two shlomims that are associated with them. That's when they get the Kedushas Aguf. L'may nafkamina if they have Kedushas Aguf. Zok Rashi, if they have Kedushas Aguf, they're possible lino, and you can't be paid to them anymore. So that only happens when you shecht them. So Rashi says they'd be possible lino or b'yoytze if they left the azara. But they only get that Kedushas Aguf once you shecht the karbonis. So we learned the Tanya Kivshay Atzeres. The only way the lechem becomes kadosh is with the shchita of the shlam. Ketzad shachtan l'shma. What if you shechted the shlam l'shma? It was a proper shchita, and v'zarg dam l'shma. It was a textbook case of the kivshay atzeres you shechted them properly, you shvika properly, so then kiddush alechem. Then avada it would be mekadosh alechem with kiddush aguf. But if the shachat shaloi lishma, what if the shechita was shaloi lishma, or v'zark lishma? So you did the shechita shaloi lishma, but the zikr was done lishma. Wasn't really done properly. They're like kiddush alechem. That would also not be mekadosh alechem because you need the shechita. The shechita is what's important. But what happens if shachat lishma v'zark domin shaloi lishma? What if the shechita was lishma, but the zrika wasn't lishma? There is a kadosh v'ein kadosh divrei Rebbe. Zok Rebbe, it's kadosh v'ein kadosh. What does kadosh v'ein kadosh means? It's kadosh that now it's kedushas aguf and it's going to be possible with Yosy and possible with Lina, but nevertheless it's not going to become muter b'achila ayidei the shechita and the krov of the karbanos. So you see that when something is not done in ganzen properly, even though there's shnei dvarim hamatirim over here, and it's not done in ganzen properly, it takes on the isurim, it takes on the chumras, but it doesn't take on the kulas. So therefore, you cannot eat it, but it still has a din of kedushas aguf to be possible b'yosei and possible b'lina. So too over here, when they sent to Avu to Shmuel, that if a woman only spit in front of Bezdin, which is only part of the matirim of chalitza, it works only the chumrah. So therefore, it will disqualify her from doing yibum, but it will not be matter her l'shuk. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Aimer, lo'elam ein hakadosh at sheyishchat l'shwan v'yizrak daman l'shwan. The bread does not take on any kedusha until the carbon was done 100% properly with a shchita l'shma and a zrika l'shma. Frankly, Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, the Rikika l'Apostla, we just wanted to argue that this halacha of Avu Shmuel could not possibly be consistent with Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva for sure doesn't give Rikika enough of a chashivas that it would, in and of itself, ask her to do yibum in the future. That cannot be. Vatani, we looked in the brisa. Chalta v'loy rakba. She did a chalitza. She took off the shoe, but she did not spit. And let's change over to daf. Baruch Hashem, now we're right on time. So let me change the daf to daf kuf hey amar aleph, just to finish off. Hopefully it'll go. Oh, gewaltig. Or rakka v'loy kar. So she did chalitza, she did the spitting, but she didn't say the parsha. Chalitza kosher, like we learned, the chalitza will be kosher. Rakka v'loy chalza v'loy kar. What if she only spit, but she didn't do chalitza, and she didn't say what she's supposed to say? Chalitza psula. The chalitza will be possible. And when we're assuming this psula, it doesn't mean that it's possible in Gansen. It means that it won't be matar l'shuk, but it will answer her. It'll forbid her from doing yibum. But Karav, she only did kriya, v'loy rakka v'loy chalta, but she didn't do any mais at all, not rikika, not chalitza. There you say inkan beis michush. So you see, in the third case, inkan beis michush means it's nothing at all. She can even make yibum. Vice the chois, the case before that psula, there is some impact that the chalitza had, and the impact would be is that she's now also to the yibum. So we have a brisa that says this. Mani, who is the author of this brisa? Ilemi Rabbi Eliezer. If it's Rabbi Eliezer who holds that without Rikika, it's not a good chalitza at all, the chalitza wouldn't be kosher. We learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer said that Rikika is ma'akev, and this bride says that Rikika is not ma'akev. It must be that this bride is following the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, whereas Rikika is not ma'akev. Yet the bride says the katani rakka v'lei chalza v'lei kar chalitza psula. Who is this chalitza puzzle for? What did it mean in the brayso when it says chalitza psula? We already explained what it means. That it means that she's, although it won't be matar l'shuk, but she's still not allowed to do evil. But now the Gemara is fearing it all. If you're going to say she's not mutter to marry anybody, pshita, of course she can't marry anybody. She's still a Yevamos. We have a chalitza d'ishtar l'alma. This is not a good chalitza that I'll be matar l'shuk. And the lav la'achin, vice the chayis. What else is going to do? It's not going to be matar l'shuk. It's only a good chalitza. It's only a good chalitza to pass her to the achin that she can no longer do yibum. Shema mina. You see from here clear that Rabbi Akiva is the shita who holds that. Rabbi Akiva is the shita who holds that it will pass her la'achin. So that was the Gemara's kasha. And you said before that Rabbi Akiva holds the chalitza wouldn't pass her la'achin. From this prize, you see that in fact this chalitza, if there's only rikika, it would pass her la'achin. We'll stop here, and we'll be mamshach tomorrow. I'm very excited because Baruch Hashem now we are on the daf And tomorrow's daf is daf kufay, and that's what we'll be learning. Mitzvah 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful, wonderful bench today.